The Caribbean doesn't begin gently here. It arrives all at once. A wall of turquoise so vivid it looks like something invented. A colour a painter might mix and then think better of. Too bright, too perfect, too obviously beautiful. And yet there it is, stretching from horizon to horizon along a thin strip of land on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, where the warm waters of the Caribbean Sea meet one of the most geologically extraordinary coastlines on Earth. This is a place that most Americans know by reputation. The spring break capital, the all-inclusive resort strip, the place you fly into and don't leave until checkout. And all of that is true, as far as it goes. But that version of the story misses almost everything that makes this stretch of coastline genuinely remarkable. Underneath the resorts, beneath the white sand beaches, behind the jungle that presses in from the west, there is a world that has been quietly extraordinary for thousands of years. A world that was old when the first European ship appeared on this horizon. And a world that continues largely indifferent to the hotels built on top of it. The Yucatan Peninsula sits at the meeting point of the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea. Geologically, it is unlike most of the American tropics. There are no rivers here, not in the conventional sense. The limestone shelf that forms the peninsula is so porous that rainwater disappears almost immediately into the rock, filtering down into a vast underground network of rivers, caves, and flooded passages that stretch for hundreds of miles in every direction. The rivers here flow underground, and where the ceilings of those passages collapse, they leave behind what the Maya called cenotes, circular pools of crystal clear freshwater open to the sky, ringed by hanging roots and ancient stone, connected by tunnels to an aquifer that stretches the length of the peninsula. There are thousands of them, scattered through the jungle, hidden behind resort walls, sitting in the middle of jungle clearings as if placed there by design. Some are open and wide, their turquoise water visible from the road. Others are enclosed, almost cave-like, reached by steep staircases cut into the limestone, where the only light falls from a single opening in the ceiling far above. All of them are connected. divers who explore the underwater passages find a world that feels genuinely alien. Cathedral-like chambers, stalactites that formed thousands of years ago when the caves were still dry. And columns of light filtering down through openings far overhead. The visibility in these flooded passages can exceed 300 feet. Water this clear doesn't exist in many places on Earth, and the passages themselves go on for distances that continue to surprise even experienced cave divers. The flooded cave system beneath the Yucatan is the longest known underwater cave system in the world, with explored passages stretching for hundreds of miles and new sections still being mapped every year. For the ancient Maya, the cenotes were not simply a water source, they were portals, entrances to Xibalba, the underworld, sacred sites where offerings were made, where rituals connected the living to the dead, where the boundary between this world and the next felt dangerously thin. Archaeologists diving into the deepest cenotes have found ceremonial objects, human remains, evidence of rituals performed in the dark water centuries before any European ship approached this coastline. Some cenotes have yielded finds of extraordinary significance: jade offerings, incense burners, the bones of animals sacrificed in ceremonies whose meaning we can only partially reconstruct. The Maya built their civilization in a landscape without surface water, and they understood its underground geography with a precision that modern hydrologists continue to find impressive. Every cenote was known. Every passage had a name. The underground world was not a mystery to the people who lived above it. It was a map, a theology, and a survival system all at once. The limestone shelf extends out under the sea as well. Just offshore, the ocean floor drops away in a series of shelves and walls, coral reef systems that rank among the most diverse in the Western Hemisphere. The Mesoamerican Barrier Reef, the second largest coral reef system in the world after Australia's Great Barrier Reef, runs the length of this coastline, providing shelter for an ecosystem of extraordinary complexity. Eagle rays drift along the reef walls. Whale sharks gather seasonally in the open water offshore, the largest fish on Earth, moving through the warm Caribbean with improbable grace. Sea turtles, loggerhead, green and hawksbill, have nested on these beaches for longer than any human civilization has existed here. Nurse sharks rest motionless on the sandy bottom in the reef shallows, unbothered by the snorkelers passing overhead. Parrotfish move in schools through the coral, and their colours almost cartoonish. Blues and greens and pinks that seem to belong to a different kind of world than the grey Atlantic that most Americans grow up knowing. The reef here is alive in a way that is increasingly rare. Coral bleaching events, warming water, and coastal development have damaged reef systems across the Caribbean over the past several decades. Here, conservation efforts and the relative depth and health of this particular system have preserved something close to what Caribbean reefs looked like before the modern era. It is not pristine, but it is extraordinary. And then there is Cancun itself. 50 years ago, this was nothing. A barrier island of white sand and mangroves inhabited by a handful of fishermen. The Mexican government commissioned a study in the late 1960s to identify the best location in the country for a world-class beach resort. Computers, an unusual tool for such a decision in that era, analysed climate data, beach quality, water clarity, and proximity to the United States. The answer came back: a thin strip of sand on the northeastern tip of the Yucatan. By 1974, the first hotels were open. By the 1980s, Cancun was one of the most visited resort destinations in the Americas. Today, more than 30 hotels line the hotel zone, a narrow strip of land shaped like a 7-shaped barrier island with the Caribbean on one side and the calm waters of Laguna Nichupte on the other. The city that grew behind the hotel zone now holds nearly 1 million people, a full metropolitan area with neighborhoods and markets and traffic and all the texture of a real Mexican city, running parallel to the resort strip and largely invisible to the visitors who never leave it. That city, the local Cancun, the one built not for tourists, but for the people who work in the hotels and restaurants and shops, is worth a morning of anyone's time. Its markets sell produce from across the Yucatan. Its street food is exceptional, and its residents carry a relationship with this coastline that goes deeper than any resort experience can offer. Rooted in family histories that predate the hotels by generations. The hotel zone is its own kind of world. Wide boulevards lined with palm trees, luxury resorts set behind manicured gardens, shopping malls, restaurants, beach clubs with lounge chairs arranged in perfect rows facing the water. For millions of American visitors every year, this is the destination. The beach, the pool, the all-inclusive buffet, the cocktail at sunset. And there is nothing wrong with that. The beach is genuinely extraordinary. The sand is white and fine, ground from coral and limestone over millennia, and it stays cool even in direct sun because it reflects rather than absorbs heat. The water is warm, clear, and calm in most spots, sheltered from the open Atlantic by the reef system offshore. The sunsets here are long and theatrical, the sky cycling through colours that seem to deepen the further west you look. Over the lagoon and the jungle, and the flat limestone plain stretching toward the interior of the peninsula. But Cancun is also a starting point, a gateway to a coastline that stretches south for more than 80 miles, through a series of towns, jungle reserves, and ancient ruins that tell a story far older and stranger than any resort brochure suggests. South of Cancun, the landscape shifts almost immediately. The high-rise hotels give way to smaller developments, then to stretches of jungle that press right to the edge of the road. This is the Riviera Maya, the name given to the coastal strip running from just south of Cancun all the way to Tulum. The road that runs through it, Highway 307, is one of the most curious stretches of asphalt in North America. On one side, the jungle. On the other, the sea, though you can rarely see it from the road, hidden behind the dunes and the vegetation. And at intervals, signposts pointing toward beach towns, cenotes, archaeological sites. And resort complexes that have been carved from the jungle with the kind of ambition that would have impressed the ancient Maya themselves. The highway was itself a kind of opening act. Before it was paved and widened, this entire stretch of coast was accessible only by boat or by rough dirt tracks through the jungle. The communities that exist here now, Playa del Carmen, Akumal, Tulum, were tiny fishing settlements, or, in some cases, nothing at all. The road made the Riviera Maya possible, and in doing so, it set in motion one of the fastest coastal transformations anywhere in the Americas. Puerto Morelos is the first town of consequence south of Cancun. It is the anti-Cancun in many ways. Small, unhurried, built around a traditional town square that faces the sea rather than a hotel strip. Fishing boats still go out in the morning. A central clock tower presides over the square with the particular unhurried authority of a town that has not yet decided to be in a hurry. The reef here is close to shore, close enough to swim to from the beach, and the town has organised itself around protecting it. Puerto Morelos sits at the centre of a marine national park, and the reef here is some of the healthiest on the entire coast. Dense coral formations sheltering an improbable abundance of marine life. Parrotfish graze on coral, their teeth strong enough to bite through limestone. Spotted eagle rays cruise the sandy bottom. Green sea turtles surface for air with a patience that suggests they have been doing this for much longer than anyone watching them, which they have. And the town attracts the kind of traveller who finds Cancun too large and Tulum too fashionable. People who want the Caribbean water and the fresh seafood and the slower rhythm of a place that is still primarily organised around the needs of the people who live there rather than the people passing through. Further south, Playa del Carmen has grown from a small fishing village into the most cosmopolitan town on the Riviera Maya. Fifth Avenue, Quinta Avenida, runs parallel to the beach for more than 20 blocks. A pedestrian street lined with restaurants, boutiques and bars that draw visitors from across Europe and the Americas. At night, it fills with a mix of travellers that feels genuinely international. Italian, German, Argentine, American, Canadian, all moving through a streetscape that has been designed with the specific purpose of keeping people on it as long as possible. It succeeds. The beach here is wide and white, and the ferry terminal at the south end of town sends boats regularly across the channel to Cozumel, a large island sitting in the Caribbean 10 miles offshore, where the reef diving is considered among the finest in the world. The Palancar Reef off Cozumel's southwestern shore drops in vertical walls of coral to depths measured in hundreds of feet. Its columns and caverns so elaborate that divers who have explored reefs on every continent return to it again and again. Jacques Cousteau visited Cozumel in the 1960s and called it one of the most beautiful diving spots in the world. The intervening decades have done little to diminish that assessment. While the currents that run along Cozumel's western shore bring cold, nutrient-rich water up from depth. Feeding a reef ecosystem of unusual density and health. Visibility regularly exceeds 100 feet. The marine life is abundant enough that a single drift dive along the wall can produce encounters with species that would be considered significant sightings anywhere else on Earth. But the Riviera Maya's most unexpected character is ecological rather than architectural. The coastline sits at the edge of a vast tropical jungle, the largest in North America after the Amazon basin, and that jungle is not simply scenery. It is a living system of extraordinary complexity. Jaguars move through the interior, following routes that predate every road and resort on this coast by thousands of years. They are rarely seen. But camera traps set up by researchers in the jungle behind the resort corridor regularly capture images of jaguars moving through the darkness a few hundred yards from hotel swimming pools, completely unaware of or entirely uninterested in the world on the other side of the tree line. Howler monkeys announce dawn from the canopy in a sound that carries for miles and initially defies the imagination. It sounds nothing like a monkey, more like a distant storm, a deep rumbling that rises and falls and makes first-time visitors look to the sky for weather. Ocelots, coatis, spider monkeys, tapirs, and hundreds of species of birds inhabit a green world that begins just a few feet from the resort walls and extends unbroken for hundreds of miles to the west and south. The jungle here is not decorative. It is the same jungle that covered this entire coastline before the first hotel was built, and it has been waiting patiently at the edges of every clearing ever since. The Sian Ka'an Biosphere Reserve protects the largest portion of this coastline ecosystem in its natural state. Established in 1987 and designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site the same year, the reserve covers more than 1.3 million acres of tropical forest, wetlands, mangroves, and reef. It is the largest protected area in the Mexican Caribbean and one of the most important conservation zones in the Americas. The northern edge of the reserve begins just south of Tulum, and within its boundaries, the coastline reverts to what this entire coast looked like before the first resort was built. Empty beaches stretch for miles without a building in sight. Lagoons thick with mangroves shelter populations of manatees, crocodiles, and the kind of wading bird colonies that feel almost prehistoric in their abundance. Roseate spoonbills standing in the shallows in improbable pink. Great blue herons motionless as sculpture. Frigate birds circling overhead on 7-foot wingspans that require no more than a subtle adjustment of wingtip to cover miles without a single wing beat. The name Sian Ka'an translates from Maya as "where the sky is born." Standing on one of the reserve's empty beaches at first light, the sun coming up over the water, and the mangroves still dark on the landward side, it is not difficult to understand why someone chose that name. The ancient Maya understood this coastline as well as anyone who has ever lived here. Their civilization dominated the Yucatán Peninsula for more than 1,000 years, and they left evidence of their presence everywhere. In the jungle, on the cliff tops above the sea, in the darkness of the cenotes. The ruins they left behind are not simply archaeological curiosities. They are evidence of a civilization of genuine sophistication. One that built in stone, mapped the stars with precision, developed a written language of considerable complexity, and organised trade networks that stretched from central Mexico to the Gulf Coast to the Caribbean islands. The Maya were watching this sea long before anyone else arrived to watch it with them. Cobá sits in the interior, about 40 miles west of the coast, surrounded by jungle that presses in on every side. The site was one of the largest Maya cities in the northern Yucatan, and at its peak, it may have housed 50,000 people. Today, the ruins are distributed across several square miles of jungle, connected by raised stone causeways, sakbayob, that the Maya built to link different sections of the city and that stretch in straight lines through the forest for distances that feel improbable given the terrain they cross. The longest of these causeways runs for more than 60 miles, connecting Cobá to a smaller site to the west, a feat of engineering that required both sophisticated surveying and an enormous coordinated labour force. The largest structure at Cobá is the Nohok Mul Pyramid, one of the tallest Maya structures on the entire peninsula, rising nearly 140 feet above the jungle floor. From its summit, And the view extends in every direction over an unbroken sea of green. The canopy of the Yucatan jungle stretching to every horizon, with no sign of the modern world visible in any direction. Two lakes are visible from the top, their surfaces catching the light through the forest cover. In the Maya world, lakes and cenotes and standing water were sacred, and a city positioned between two lakes was positioned at the center of something significant. It is one of the most striking viewpoints in all of Mexico, and the climb to reach it, steep stone steps set at an angle that feels more like a ladder than a staircase, makes the view feel genuinely earned. Tulum is perhaps the most photographed Maya site in Mexico, and the reason is immediately obvious. The ruins sit on a limestone cliff above the Caribbean, 40 feet above the turquoise water, positioned so that every photograph taken from the beach below includes both the ancient stonework and the improbably beautiful sea behind it. The walled city here was a late-period Maya site, occupied well into the Spanish colonial era, and it functioned primarily as a trading port positioned along the sea routes that connected the Maya world from the Gulf Coast to Honduras. Canoes loaded with trade goods moved along this coast for centuries, stopping at Tulum to exchange cacao, jade, obsidian, and copper bells for goods coming from the south and west. The Castillo, the site's largest structure, sits at the very edge of the cliff. It may have functioned as a lighthouse of sorts, a structure whose doorways were positioned to create a navigational marker for canoes approaching from the sea. A shaft of light visible through an opening in the wall that told approaching traders they had reached safe harbour. And on certain mornings the light hits it in a way that seems calculated. The sun rising over the sea, the stone turning gold, the water below cycling through its impossible range of blues and greens. It is a view that stops people, not because it has been dressed up or explained or turned into a spectacle, but because it is simply, plainly, one of the most beautiful juxtapositions of human construction and natural setting anywhere in this hemisphere. The town of Tulum itself has transformed over the past 2 decades from a backpacker stopover into one of the most talked about destinations in the Americas. The beach road south of the ruins is lined with boutique hotels, yoga studios, and restaurants that have developed a visual language all their own. Thatched roofs, natural materials, a kind of luxurious rusticity that signals both ecological consciousness and considerable expense. The Tulum aesthetic has become influential far beyond Mexico, copied in beach destinations from Bali to Portugal, but the original remains distinct, partly because the setting is genuinely hard to match. The jungle on one side, the reef-sheltered Caribbean on the other, and the ancient ruins visible from the beach as a reminder that this particular stretch of coastline has attracted human attention for a very long time. Tulum is not without its complications. The rapid growth of the past decade has brought development pressure that sits uneasily against the ecological systems that make the place worth visiting in the first place. The cenotes beneath the town are increasingly vulnerable to contamination from infrastructure that was not built with underground water in mind. The jungle is under pressure from construction. The reef offshore has felt the effects of increased runoff and anchoring. These are tensions that the town has not fully resolved, and they give Tulum a complexity that its glossy reputation sometimes obscures. It is possible to love a place and worry about it at the same time. Tulum requires both. The sea turtles were here before all of it. They nest on the beaches of the Riviera Maya from May through October, coming ashore at night to dig their chambers in the sand above the tide line. Loggerhead turtles, some of them decades old, navigate by the magnetic field of the Earth to return to the same beaches where they hatched. Sometimes travelling thousands of miles through open ocean to do so. The precision of this navigation is one of the more humbling facts in the natural world. An animal that cannot see its destination, finding it anyway, guided by forces it has no name for, returning to a specific stretch of sand on a specific coastline on the other side of an ocean. On the beaches of Akumal, a small bay south of Playa del Carmen whose name means place of the turtle in Maya. Green sea turtles graze on seagrass in the shallows so close to shore that snorkelers can watch them at arm's length. The turtles are unhurried by the presence of people, moving through the water with the slow certainty of creatures that have long since worked out their relationship with time. Akumal itself is a small community that has oriented its entire identity around the turtles. Tour operators, marine biologists, and conservation organisations work together here to manage the snorkeling experience. Limiting numbers, requiring guides, keeping visitors far enough from the animals that the interaction doesn't become a disturbance. Volunteers patrol the nesting beaches at night during nesting season. Relocating eggs that have been laid in dangerous positions. Counting and recording every nest, monitoring hatchlings as they make their way to the water. It is meticulous, unglamorous work performed in the dark on a beach that looks very different at midnight than it does in the photographs. Yet the result is something increasingly rare in a region as heavily visited as the Riviera Maya, a wildlife encounter that feels genuinely respectful of the animals involved. And a conservation effort that is quietly, measurably working. Turtle populations on these beaches have grown steadily over the past several decades. A small but significant counter-narrative to the story of coastal development and ecological loss. The food of the Yucatan is its own argument for spending time here. It is one of the most distinctive regional cuisines in Mexico, which is itself one of the great food cultures on Earth. The Maya developed a culinary tradition rooted in corn, beans, squash, and chili. And over centuries, that tradition absorbed influences from the Caribbean, from Spain. From the Middle East, Lebanese immigrants arrived in the Yucatan in the 19th century. And left a culinary mark that persists to this day. Cochinita pibil, slow-roasted pork marinated in sour orange and achi, wrapped in banana leaves and cooked underground, is the emblematic dish of the peninsula. And versions of it appear everywhere from market stalls to resort restaurants. The best versions come from places that have been making the same dish for generations. Where the technique has been refined to a point that looks effortless and is anything but. Panuchos and salbutes, Small fried tortillas topped with turkey or chicken and pickled onion are the street food of the Yucatan. Eaten standing up, quickly, with a cold drink and the particular satisfaction of something that costs almost nothing and tastes like everything. Heck, the seafood along the coast is exceptional in the way that seafood always is, when the distance between the boat and the table can be measured in hours rather than days. Ceviche, made from fresh fish, or octopus, dressed with lime and habanero, whole grilled fish pulled from the Caribbean that morning. Shrimp tacos, eaten at a plastic table on a beach with no name, served by someone who has been cooking them in exactly the same way for 20 years and has no intention of changing anything. The light here has a quality that photographers and painters have been trying to describe for decades without quite capturing it. It has to do with the water. The reef offshore filters and calms the waves, creating a surface that reflects light differently than open ocean, steadier, more even, amplified by the white limestone sand beneath the shallows. In the early morning, the water near shore turns colours that shift by the minute as the sun rises. Pale gold, then green, then the deep, saturated turquoise that defines this coast in every photograph ever taken of it. In the late afternoon, the light softens and the whole coastline takes on a warmth that seems to come from inside the landscape rather than from above it. The ruins glow, the jungle deepens. The water turns colours that have no names in English, or possibly in any language. The Riviera Maya asks something of the traveller who is willing to look past the obvious. Not a great effort. The distance between the resort pool and the remarkable world just beyond it is surprisingly short. A rental car south on Highway 307. A guided dive on the Mesoamerican Reef. An early morning visit to a cenote before the tour buses arrive. Yet when the water is still and the light falls in a single column from the opening above and there is no sound except the drip of water from the roots overhead. A walk through the ruins of Cobá in the low light of late afternoon when the tourists have gone and the jungle sounds begin to reassert themselves. The howl of monkeys in the distance, the birds cycling through their evening routines. The extraordinary light filtering through the canopy onto stone that was cut and placed by human hands 1,500 years ago. A night on the beach at Sian Ka'an, far enough from the resort corridor that the stars are visible in a quantity that most Americans have never seen. The Milky Way overhead. The constellations that the Maya mapped with such precision that their astronomical records still impress modern scientists. The same sky that has looked down on this coastline for every moment of its long and complicated history. This coastline has been many things to many people across a very long stretch of time. A sacred landscape to the Maya. A colonial prize to the Spanish who followed. An empty stretch of sand and jungle for most of the 20th century. a global resort destination for the past 5 decades. And underneath all of those identities, something older and more permanent. A geological formation of rare beauty and complexity. A reef system of global ecological importance. A meeting point between two bodies of water where the colours alone are enough to stop a person cold. The Caribbean doesn't ask to be understood. It offers itself plainly. The warmth, the colour, the extraordinary clarity of water that has been filtered through limestone for thousands of years before it reaches the surface. The ruins on the clifftop, the turtles in the shallows, the jaguar moving through the jungle at a distance that keeps it, for most visitors, permanently theoretical. The cenote in the clearing, its surface still and green and impossibly clear, dropping into a darkness that connects to a world beneath the world. But it is there. All of it is there, just beyond the edge of what most people come here to see. And that is perhaps the most remarkable thing about this place.